Hi everyone! Today we're going to change a pulley or a friction wheel in a Elna sewing machine. This is a pretty common problem, and I did once actually have a video up before on how to change this pulley, but I found a much better way since. Now, anybody who's a member of the Elna Heirloom Yahoo group will be very possibly familiar with this. One of the guys there posted the specifications for a pulley, and then another one took it and ran with it and created a 3D printed file for printing a pulley. What I would think of as a permanent or a perpetual pulley, where even if it flattens off, all you have to do is you just replace part of it. You don't have to replace the whole thing, which means you don't have to take the whole pulley off anymore, which especially in the case of the older Elnas means that you don't necessarily have to lower the motor. So what I'm going to go through today is I'm going to go through this pulley. I can't call it new because it's been around for probably a year and a half. I've been a member of the Elna group for quite some time, but I've always been a lurker. I don't know if I've ever posted, but I've been there for quite some time. I'm going to go through a tool that one of the other guys in the group created. His name is Wolfgang, and he created a tool for removing the roll pin that holds the pulley onto the motor shaft. And then I'm also going to go through how to lower the motor in order to be able to get access, because some of the older machines didn't have enough clearance to either pull the old pulley off or put the new pulley on. And I'm going to show you how to deal with that. I'll tell you about the changes that, the differences between the way Wolfgang set up his tool versus the way that I've been using the tool, the changes I've made to the tool since having printed them myself, and basically most things that I can think of that you might need to know in order to be able to go through this whole process as well. So anyways, let's get started. First thing we're going to do is we're going to get access to enough clearance to change this pulley. So what we're going to do is we're going to take this machine apart a little bit. What we'll do first is we'll tip the machine over onto its side or onto its back, and that'll get us access to the bottom. The bottom has these 3 screws and these 3 washers. So make sure you collect these when you take them out of the base and set them aside. The base out of the way. The next thing that you would do is you would undo this spring. I'm not going to undo this today because I don't need to, and it's just going to take a lot of extra time, and y'all won't watch it if it's going to be a long video. Anyways, you can undo it from this side or you can undo it from this side. I'm pretty sure the last time I undid it from this side because it gives you a little bit better clearance. Then the next thing that you're going to do is you're going to pull your knee lever down. And what that's going to do is it's going to expose a roll pin. Elna and their roll pins, I tell you. This roll pin here needs to be pushed out. So you'll push this out. It'll go this way. As long as you don't have the machine standing on its top, you shouldn't have to worry about it falling into the motor. What'll probably happen is it'll drop back here and come down here. Then once that's done, you're going to pull this whole arm upwards. And once this comes clear of here, you're going to find some of this stuff kind of moves around a little bit. Once you've got that moving, what I do is I actually will stick something in there to kind of keep everything in line. In this case, well, I don't want to use this because I'm going to use this later on in the video. But anyways, you can stick something in there that's narrower that will still give everything a little bit of room to move, but it will give, and you can actually come straight through here. So if you have, that looks like possibly about a 7mm rod. If you had something that was maybe a few millimeters smaller than that, what you could do is just push it through so that this doesn't all completely come out of line, because it's a little bit of a pain in the butt to put it back together. It is, however, the easiest and probably the best way to get the clearance that we're going to need right away here. So then, once you've got all this stuff able to move, the next thing you're going to do, and this varies depending on the Elna that you're working on as well. Some of them will actually have a circlip that you'll have to remove. Some of them are more like this one here. What I've done before I started the video is I loosened this screw off. It doesn't need to be loosened off all the way. And then I'm just going to take the clutch wheel off. the washer off, and then the hand wheel off. And now we have access to our pulley. So this pulley here, friction wheel, motor pulley, whatever you want to call it. I'm usually going to call it a pulley because it's the first name I was introduced to it by. So what we have here is the typical problem. This one's not actually really, really bad, but I wanted to change this anyways because this one's my machine, and I wanted to do destructive testing to these new pulleys to see how they do. But anyways, what you can see maybe on camera is right here, there's a flat spot. And that flat spot is what makes these machines typically sound like a freight train when they're running, especially when they've got multiples of them. So being a member of the Elna Heirloom group, one of the things that I saw a year and a half ago, I want to say, is Wolfgang posted this really, really neat tool. And all it is a roll pin removal tool. And so essentially what it is it just uses a pin that goes right up against that roll pin and pushes it right out. So now this is his original design here, and it uses 4 pieces in total. What we do is we take a barrel nut, which he said he got from IKEA. I got mine from Lee Valley. They seem to be the best price. Lowe's was really high for their price. And then this is a 2-inch long bolt, and it just has to have threads that match the barrel nut, probably 1/4 inch by 20, if I remember right. And then that just goes in there and assembles there. Now this is kind of cool. There's a couple of reasons that he probably did this. What this is this is a cut down pop rivet pin. So it's the piece that's left over after you rivet something together. The pins, when you get them, look like this. This one is an 1/8 inch or 3 millimeter pop rivet, and it's made of aluminum. And I think the aluminum is important. He mentions it specifically because the idea is that this is going to bend and fail before you're going to do any damage to the motor shaft or anything like that. So what we do with these is we just take the rivet, throw it out, and then we take this and we trim this down. I find the more length you can get, the better. So I usually trim just right before this part here where they crimped for the pop rivet. Now this one here is just a tiny little bit smaller. And what he talks about is he talks about having drilled a divot in the end of this bolt. And then he puts a little bit of grease in there so that it basically holds everybody in place. I've found in practice that I haven't needed that. I found that everything just stays in place anyways, and I'm not too worried about it. What he also mentioned is that it could be glued. Now, I really do like that idea, and I may do that later. Because if this rivet pin were to be glued to the nut, or to the bolt, then a person could actually reverse it back out after they had released the roll pin from the pulley. And then that's one step that just becomes easier. And you'll see why I'm talking about that when we get a little further in here. Now, because it's a 3D printed file and we can make modifications to files like that, what I did was I actually did 2 things. 2 things? Yes. One was, this is basically the same file. This is just printed in a different material, and I didn't have it set quite right. So it's not the prettiest one, but what I did was I added, and you might be able to just barely see them, 2 little scribe lines here, and that just helps me kind of get it lined up. And then the other thing that I did is actually more related to the pulley that we're going to replace this one with. And that's just because the diameter of the collar is a little bit different. And so what I did was I actually just made another one to fit the replacement pulley in case I needed to pull it off. And I did need to pull it off 3 times for the video that I just did here for you, because I made mistakes, or I dropped stuff, or I let loose some words that I probably shouldn't have on YouTube. Anyways, so what we're going to do is we're going to first take this old pulley off, and I'm going to show you how this tool works and what makes it a little bit fiddly, but still way better than any of the other manual removal tools or methods that we use, including the video that I took down not too long ago that's been up for a couple of years. Anyways, so with this scribe line here, and I'm actually just going to turn this around, I'm going to try to line it up as best I can here. And then all I'm going to do, and this is actually just finger tight, is I'm just going to use my tool to push that out. And I can feel right now that it's not moving, so I probably haven't got it quite lined up. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to undo, back it off a little bit. Oh, maybe I did get it lined up. And you can jig it around just a little bit. And then when you do have it lined up, you'll notice there's just a little bit of extra resistance, but you can still turn by hand. And now I can feel that pin coming out the end. And what I do is I wait till I can feel it and just see it just a little bit. You won't be able to see it on camera, I'm quite sure. And then I just kind of wiggle it until hopefully it doesn't fall into the machine. But if it does, it's not a big deal. You can usually just shake the machine and it'll come out, especially if you've still got the bottom off. Anyways, that pin is now out, but my tool won't come off. And the reason that my tool won't come off, remember I showed you that this pin is pushing this other one out. So right now, this pin is actually holding that pulley on. So what we need to do is we need to get that pin to come out. Now, if this had been glued to this bolt, what we could do is we could just back it off, and then it would just come out eventually, and then that would be no big deal. But because we haven't glued ours in, we're just going to keep turning. Remember, righty-tighty, and in this case we're tightening so that we can get our pin further through. So I'm just tightening, 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 and it's actually going to, this one's going to bottom out. And then all I do is the same thing that I did before. And in fact, you might be able to grab this with a pair of pliers. I find, strangely enough, this to be a little bit easier. So now my pin's out, which is usually, and my tool has automatically removed itself. This is usually the worst part of this whole process. So what we've done now is in 30 seconds, maybe a little bit more because I was talking, we've removed this pin that everybody hates having to try to pull out. So what we're going to do is we're going to take this off, and in this case you'd think, well, yeah, I'm going to have to drop the motor for this. Sometimes what I find is there's a little tiny bit of play in that motor, and it's often just enough to be able to pull that off. If you don't have quite enough room and you decided that you weren't going to take the bottom off and you weren't going to drop the motor until you knew for sure, this would be your time to go back and lower the motor just a little bit. So now that this pulley is off, you might be able to see the flat spot. The flat spot here is actually quite lined up with that hole. So right here, and it's flattened off a bit. So this one is not terribly bad, but I have the machine, it's my machine. I thought I would test these pulleys to see how they do before I make them available to anybody who brings a machine in for service for me. So anyways, this being the old pulley, this is a 3D printed pulley that the guys in the Elna Heirloom group had posted. There's actually two different options. There's a 3D printed one that's going to be accessible for most of us. It's something that if your library can print in something other than PLA, ideally it would be in nylon, maybe even polycarbonate. You could get them to print, but I really doubt most of them are going to be able to print in that. You can order one from Shapeways. You can also order one from anybody who has a 3D printer who offers their services. This is, like I said, this is something that I'm going to offer to people who bring machines in for service, and possibly later in the shop, with the O-rings that are needed and with the replacement roll pin. Because you may be able to see here that this collar here is narrower than this one is. So the roll pin that came out of here is a 12 millimeter, and this is a 14 millimeter. And while the 12 millimeter will fit, and if you can get it centered, that's great, it's probably best to change it out for a 14 millimeter. So whenever I change these, I will be changing them out for 14 millimeter pins as well. But only after I've had a chance to really test these pulleys to destruction. Like, I'm going to get downright mean with these. Anyways, let's put our new pulley on, and this is just the same way that you would do any other pulley. And this one, I've munged this one a few times, so you want to try to maybe learn from my mistake here and just watch where you're putting your pliers when you do this. Let's line this hole up. And I'm going to use my little tool to get that fairly well lined up. Actually, let's do this a little differently. Let's take this pulley, and I'm going to use the old roll pin for right now because the new ones are really, really tight, and it would be nice to not have to fight with that on camera with you. So that's now lined up. Yep. And then this is the same way that I would normally reinstall these. And you just want to be careful. What I did before was I actually managed to catch this edge here instead of just being right on the flat spot, which munched the pulley a little bit. It's not actually going to hurt the performance of it. It's just less than ideal for looks. And we're going to take that and we're just going to push it right in. Now, because this is a shorter roll pin, what we would maybe want to do is see if we can push it a little bit further. I'm probably not going to be able to do that actually by hand. But anyways, ideally we would have it pushed just a little bit further in to get it even, but there's a really good chance I'll end up pushing it too far the other way. Anyways, that's all that's really involved. But I do want to talk about these pulleys a little bit here, even the squished one that I squished here. So basically what these are, the Elna Heirloom group has actually had these replacement pulleys for a while. At first they started out with aluminum machined ones, and that to me is probably the best option out there because they're going to be virtually indestructible. But for those of us who don't necessarily have access to somebody who can machine for us, the next best option is one of these pulleys. And these pulleys are so neat in that what they've done is they've created effectively a perpetual pulley or a permanent pulley. And the way that they've done that is they've created this core that would never need to be changed. So now that this is installed on here, if I were to find that these O-rings had flattened off, all I'd have to do is pull the pulley O-rings off and put new O-rings on. I'd never have to go through this. I'd never have to drop the motor again. All I would have to do is change those O-rings. And so what they've done is they've actually taken a size 18 O-ring, and 2 17s. Oh, I think I've got my O-rings mixed up. Yeah, I do. That's the 18 on top. The 18 should be on the bottom. Anyways, so, and this becomes the surface that your hand wheel is going to run on. And what's great about that is these are a Shore A90 hardness. So they're quite a hard O-ring. They will eventually round off, or flatten off. But if they do, it's no big deal because you can just roll these off and roll them back and roll new ones on. So, some of the problems that I find with these O-rings is that they're very difficult to find, especially in Canada. If you want them in Canada, you typically have to buy them in bags of 50, which is 6 or 7 lifetimes for most of us. Better still is when you don't communicate necessarily with your other half, and your other half also orders a bag of them or 2 bags of them for you, and you find out that you've now got 100 of each, which is many lifetimes supplies, and maybe a warning that we need to work on our communication. So that's part of the reason that I decided that I was actually going to start offering these to my customers, because why not? Otherwise, I'm just going to have a whole bunch of these O-rings that are going to eventually go bad and not be used for anything. But I do think that these are the cat's behind, just because we're not throwing away as much garbage. The ones that were on the market, or are still on the market, I believe, are really just not very good quality. I know Ray White stopped carrying those ones. I believe this is the solution he's using right now as well. I think he's having them printed through Shapeways, but I'm not positive on that. They had the same look. All right, part 2 of the video. My microphone just died. The battery just died. So anyways, the other things that I wanted to talk about here is that these files, this 3D printed file, not the one that I've modified, but the one that that Wolfgang posted originally, and the one that Rob, I believe his name was, posted originally. So Wolfgang for the removal tool and Rob for the pulley are both available in the Elna Heirloom Yahoo group, but only, as best I can tell, until about December. From what I understand, when I logged in today just to check up on a couple of things, I saw that they said that you couldn't upload files any longer after November 28th, which was really nice considering that was yesterday. And they would no longer be hosting third-party files as of some time in December. So if you want that file, it would be a good idea to go and grab that file now if you have a way to print it. You do want to make sure that whoever you have printed, or if you print it, that you do it in something other than PLA. Typically if you go to the library and you say, can you print this file for me, it'll be done in a type of plastic called PLA. And PLA has a few drawbacks for this type of printing. When it comes to these pulleys, PLA tends to be quite brittle. PLA also has a glass transition point of about 60 to 65 degrees Celsius. And there is potential for the machine to reach temperatures higher than that. And so you would want to use a stronger plastic or more resilient plastic. PETG is the one that I've got this one made out of here, and I want to see if that one's going to have the resilience that we need. If not, I'll be moving to nylon and printing them out of nylon. If you can print in something like polycarbonate, that might be an option as well. I'd actually really like to try one in that, but I haven't set up for that yet. But if your library can print in something else, that might be an option. You can also order from Shapeways. That's a really good option, as best I understand it, in the US. Once you start trying to ship them across the borders, doesn't seem to matter which border, the shipping tends to get pretty high, to the point where the shipping actually is equivalent or higher than the part, because it's such a small part. Additionally, there is one right now. Actually, there's one file on Thingiverse that I haven't had a chance to test yet. It's not the same file, it's a similar file. But it may also be an option. The thing I didn't like about it is that it uses 3 different sized O-rings, and I already had enough trouble getting 2 sizes of O-rings and several lifetime supplies of them. So having to buy 4 sizes, I really wasn't all that interested in that. But if you have a really good source of O-rings, then that might be a viable option for you as well. So at this point, I guess I will say that in the spirit of the file having been given away for free and in the public domain, if a person does want one of these pulleys, contact me and I can print them only for my time and the parts. And what I would do is I would send the roll pin, a new roll pin, the part, 2 sets of O-rings, and you'd get all of that, and then you'd be basically up and running right off the bat. So the mods that I've done to the pulley that was originally posted in the Elna group is that I resized the center, because they had mentioned that the pulleys often had to be reamed out. They had to be they printed just a little bit smaller than the 7mm shaft that they're going on. Now, that's pretty normal with 3D printers. It's kind of the nature of them. They tend to make the hole smaller, especially small holes. They tend to print just a little bit smaller. It's just kind of the nature of the beast. So what I did was, based on my printer specifically, the printer that we got in June, I made sure that the file printed exactly the way that I needed without having to make any adjustments. That way I didn't have to worry about drilling them off center or any other issues like that. And so then what I do is any pulley that comes off my printer, I test fit onto a rod, test fit onto this machine, and then consider them good to go. So after this, the only things that I have left to do is to test these pulleys to destruction. That means I'm going to be monitoring, I'm going to be sewing, I'm going to be running these machines at top speed for a little while just to see how they do. I'm going to be, or these pulleys at top speed to see how they do. I'm going to see how they're doing with friction. I want to see if they're slipping. One thing I did notice when I printed the first one in PLA is that it warped. I think the machine actually managed to slip. I think I actually forced it. I think I held the hand wheel and ran the motor just to see what would happen. And it actually deformed the pulley. So we'll be watching for things like that as well, just to see. I know that polycarbonate and PETG were both specifically mentioned as possibilities, and I want to make sure that that's going to be the case before we have failing pulleys going out there as well. So I think I've covered everything, and now I have to see if I can figure out how to join two files together, because my headset was so rude as to die halfway through a video. But if you have any questions, I have disabled comments in all of my YouTube videos because some people were getting pretty abusive and rude, and I really just didn't feel like dealing with that anymore. So I've disabled the comments, but if you have questions or comments about this, please feel free to join our Facebook group, and I will post a link down in the description on how to get to that, and let us know what you think. There's a whole group there of enthusiasts who work on vintage sewing machines and talk about them and related things and related hobbies, etc. And we're trying to create a very healthy environment in which everybody can talk and interact and learn things. So please do consider joining us, and I'll talk to you soon.